today. But before we get started, I will introduce myself and do a little bit of housekeeping for the session. So I'm Jan Pearce, for those of you who don't know me, and I am a Programme Manager in NHS IMAS. And I lead on pool member development. This is one of our pool member development sessions, particularly pertinent because it's covering consultancy and facilitation skills, which will be helpful to you as pool members. We've got Val with us today, as I said, and Val is a friend of NHS IMAS and a long associate of ours, and has been running the full blended learning course on consultancy and facilitation skills for quite some years now, and she designed the course as well, so has got lots of experience in this area. In terms of housekeeping, we are recording the session and it will be available on our website at a point for you to watch in the future at your own convenience. If we can all stay on mute during the session, we will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end, and there is a chance for you to drop things into the chat box if they occur to you as we go along. We have had some connectivity problems with Val, so we're just going to have her on sound only, and hopefully we'll be able to get through it, but do bear with us if it all goes a bit wrong. So one of my colleagues is going to manage the slides for Val, so you will hear, next slide please, which I'm afraid is unavoidable. I do apologise for that. But without further ado, if I can hand over to Val, who will get us going, and fingers crossed everyone that we can hear her, and I'll put my camera off too to try and help with bandwidth. Thank you. Over to you, Val.
Thank you very much, Nick. Can you hear me, Janet? So I assume I'm hearable, and someone will tell me if I'm not. So good morning, everybody. As Janet very kindly introduced me, I'm Val Glenny, and been working with IMAS for probably since it started really, and I'm the author of the blended learning course on consultancy and facilitation. I should say, Janet, the presentation or the webinar today is primarily around consultancy skills. But of course, there is a significant overlap. It's very hard to do consultancy work without doing a good amount of facilitation work at the same time. Hence, in the course, we have the two modules because one really can't go without the other. And I'm very happy to answer any questions on facilitation. But we do have a full module on facilitation following on from the consultancy skills module related to the blended learning course. However, this webinar does stand alone, so don't worry if you're thinking, well, I'm not going to be doing that course. Hopefully, this will give you a flavour of the way in which certainly NHS IMAS like to approach consultancy. What I'm going to say is very much built on my personal experience as well as authoring the course, and because of that, of course, it is a personal experience, and you will all have different experiences. You may recognize a lot of what I say, it may surprise you, you may want to challenge it, so feel free to do that in the discussion. So this isn't a definitive right answer sort of webinar. And in fact, that is something that NHS IMAS are very clear about in terms of the way in which you go about your consultancy, that there is necessarily no one right answer. And we'll come into that when we look at the processes of consultancy that we, if you like, promote through NHS. So I guess the only other thing to say in terms of introduction is that I've been working across the NHS for about 35 years, which makes me feel very old, at all levels, mainly with senior senior managers and doctors, particularly with doctors in the last few years. But I did train as a youth and community worker in inner city areas, so quite a broad range of background. And my academic background is more around organisational psych and behaviour. So that, you know, I won't say any more about that, but just to give you a bit of context. So if we now go on to this first slide about consultancy skills. If you're going to work with NHS IMAS, there are some things that perhaps you need to be aware of. So I'm just going to go through these 4 points in a bit more detail in a moment, but we're going to talk about your unique contribution. It is different being in a role as a consultant than it is as a role in a hierarchy in the NHS, which I am imagining most of you have come from or still are in, and we'll talk that through a bit. We'll then take you through the broad framework of the consultancy process that is adopted in NHS IMAS to a large degree, and I'll give you a reference there as well as to where that comes from, or at least the basics of that come from that we've now developed. I'll reflect on a few of the challenges that I've encountered through that process, and that may prompt some debate, discussion with yourselves at the end. And then finally, we'll very talk about what sorts of support you might be able to access with NHS IMAS. And I'm sure Jan would perhaps want to add something of her own to that, as she's the lead project manager for. But if we can just get going now on to the next slide, please, which is your unique contribution. I've pulled out 3 key points here. First, fairly obviously, but something that you can quite often forget if you are an employee, particularly if you're an employee within the NHS. You can may well develop certain habits and certain assumptions, maybe within a hierarchy, within an organisation that you're working. And of course, when you move into a consultancy role, albeit maybe for a temporary period, you actually don't have the position power that you may well have in your organisation. You carry no formal authority, and that can be quite a challenge and quite a surprise in terms of the nature of the relationship that you then have to develop with those around you. Particularly if you go to an organisation with a very different culture than you're used to. So you don't have that position power, and that's really important to get used to, if you like, when you go into a consultancy role. And to perhaps, you know, you may, for example, go into a piece of consultancy work, you can see what needs doing, and your instincts are in a line manager mindset of, well, I know what needs doing here. What I need to do is take the lead and make sure it happens and make the decisions that need to be made to make something happen. And of course, in a consultancy role, you're working with others in the organisation to help them make the decisions, and that's quite an interesting mindset change. The second thing, in terms of your unique contribution, if you like, in a consultancy role for NHS IMAS, is that you have often been, if you like, chosen, or NHS IMAS has been asked to come in because you carry with you a set of characteristics, if you like, and a way of working that probably the organisation, the host organisation, your client, will not get if they went to, for example, a private sector consultancy. And quite early on in the life of NHS IMAS, I did an evaluation for them, and one of the questions that was asked was, why do you choose IMAS over and above, you know, all the choice of independent consultancy firms out there? And there were 4 key things. One was that the client's interest would come first. There was a strong belief that if you asked NHS IMAS to come in, the person coming in would very much put your interests at the heart of and first in their work and their thinking. And, you know, I guess that's the indication there is that a private company, they would have profit motive, they would have all sorts of other interests the company may wish to pursue, you know, gathering more work and so on. So it was very important that people believed you are putting their interests first. A second thing that they valued hugely was the belief and the experience that NHS IMAS consultants were looking to produce sustainable value to the client. And here they're talking about things like not only sustainable change, but you would be supporting developers to keep that change sustainable once you've left. You wouldn't be looking to be indispensable, if you like, and you would be trying to upskill and develop those who were going to be left to ensure changes and developments were bedded in. The third thing, you would only accept the work, and this is very much one of NHS IMAS's values, only accept work that you would feel qualified to do and have the capacity to do. So they expect, and IMAS would expect, only to assign you to a project that you feel confident that you can do. Of course, IMAS do give a lot of support behind the scenes if it's a first time contract and so on. But basically, people both have the time and the expertise, if you like, or experience to be able to out a project. And I think with that was that you would also have the knowledge, the NHS knowledge, and perhaps this is something to do with an offer as well, that you would be probably from within the NHS. And you not only have the capacity and the qualifications, part of that qualification would be your knowledge and experience of the NHS, which would mean you could sort of hit the ground running, if you like, and there wouldn't be a need to explain in great detail about how the NHS works, how the hierarchies work, what the relationship with different professional groups might look like, and so on. That's really important to clients of NHS. And that you would be clear and transparent about what you're trying to do, and you would, NHS IMAS talks about in terms of their values, you would be giving clear, objective and fact-based advice. Okay, so there are a number of things there that are really important to NHS IMAS, and in the evaluation were really important to clients. And I guess the development of the values was sort of in collaboration in those early days with clients. So it is that you have that NHS experience for a lot of people. It means you can get going more quickly. It means that you can offer, therefore, good value for money. And there is a belief that you would a mile in transferring those knowledge and skills. So I think that's a really important background for expectations, if you like, of people who are in the NHS IMAS pool. Next slide, please, a framework for consultancy. NHS IMAS have a commitment through their values to work a particular way when doing consultancy work. And when writing the blended learning course, I found or identified a book that I think in many ways encapsulated much of what NHS IMAS are looking for in a consultancy process. And it's a book which you may want to write down, or I can certainly post through to Jan, called The 7 C's of Consulting. And that's by someone called Mick Cope. Now, we don't lift directly from Mick's work, but we do use broadly his framework in the way in which we think about the consultancy process. And it actually, as you can see from this slide, a sort of basic but helpful set of steps to go through. So let's just go through these. The first one, organisation entry. I think the thing about this framework is you need to be very conscious that there are different steps. You need to be really conscious you are entering the organisation and you are in relationships. So you're going in right at the beginning with a clear clarity about what you're trying to do at this point in time. So there are a number of issues here that you need to think about. Who's the client is the obvious first question. Who am I trying to establish relationships with? Now, NHS IMAS will have done a letter of contract with the organisation, and no doubt there'll be a lead client on that. But as many of you will know, that doesn't mean that's the only client, and that there are other clients who are not as the one that's signed off the contract, if you like, but with whom you need to work closely and you need to keep on board. Really important to take time at this stage to plan both who your clients are and more broadly your stakeholders are, and build sufficient, because NHS IMAS is all about working alongside people in organisations. You're not going to be able to do that if you haven't done the groundwork with them. We'll come on later to some of the challenges on this, because one thing that can often happen is clients change or emerge that you weren't expecting further down. This is a critical stage because it also is about setting the tone. From the moment you start working with an organisation, whether it's virtually or you will be setting a tone of your style and your approach with people. And as we all know, first impressions can make a big difference to how something then unfolds. Once you've established that level of and through those conversations that you will be having with the identified clients and stakeholders, you will start to get the diagnosis, if you like. And again, there will have been a high level or a broad level of diagnosis done in terms of the contracting of the letter. Somebody would have contacted NHS IMAS and they understand to be the issue that they want support with. However, as we once you start work on something, quite often it's more complicated than that, and there are a number of different perceptions. And so one advice here is resist jumping to conclusions or assuming that what worked elsewhere will work where you are. That obviously doesn't always happen. And also resist, take any diagnosis given to you by your client, not with a pinch of salt, but just remember that they will, like you, just have one perspective, and that you really do need to check out and triangulate with other people before confirming any joint diagnosis. Getting agreement over that diagnosis is crucial. So that does mean resisting pressure for a quick fix, and expect differing and even contradictory diagnoses from within the organisation that you will need to navigate through. And we're talking here, I guess, not just in terms of the range of perspectives of what the issue is. We're talking about levels as well. So for me, there's a sort of micro level and a meta level, and there's something in between. So you may have people who see it in a very transactional way, and they just need to, tweak a few things, introduce a particular mechanism or process. And there'll be other people who say this is all about the culture. This is all about the organisational structure and so on. And so you're looking at a series of layers, always unpeeling, and it's how you and your client come together around a shared understanding of what that looks like, and perhaps which of those elements are critical to the success of resolving an issue. And that's when you come to build a solution to you. Without the buy-in, there's a good chance that you won't achieve sustainable change. You may get something done. You may get, I don't know, a new process installed into a department, but that's not the same thing as sustainable change necessarily. And so you need to close both that diagnosis and the potential solution. Okay, if we could go on to the next slide, please. We then come into making change happen, processes. And sometimes we leap to number 4 and we haven't really done a great deal with numbers 1, 2 and 3. And there's often pressure to do that in a very short-termist, sort of crisis-driven culture, which we often get in the NHS. Just when you do get to this stage, and you should by then have got a shared understanding of what you're trying to do, your goal is, what the issues are that need addressing, it is almost guaranteed that making change happen will happen at a number of levels and layers. So you will have a transactional element, almost, which may be introducing a new process or new standards or some other project management tool. But you will also inevitably be working on the softer, which you can think of, harder skills around behaviours, culture, and so on. You may also be working to meta processes. So it may be you're working a department and there are issues that actually are beyond the boundary of the department, that actually are having a major impact on the ability of the department to deliver the change that their organisation wants. That can be the trickiest, of course, because all through this you're managing your boundaries and your limits, and may feel I can't take that on, access the people I need to access, and so on. And we can talk about that in the discussion if you'd like later on. Evidencing change, 5th step in Mick Cope's process. For me, evidencing change actually runs alongside all of these stages. It's difficult to evidence change if you haven't benchmarked where you started. And I don't just mean in terms of 4-hour wait or some other target, but also patient experience maybe, or reports of certain types of behaviour that are unacceptable, for example, and so on. You need to know where you've come from to know that you've actually got where you want to get. And there are a whole range of ways of thinking about evidencing. And in our course, we think about that a bit more carefully. So that obviously there's qualitative and quantitative outcomes, if you like. But even with outcomes, there are outputs. So figures, numbers that you can count. There's outcomes, which are broader and maybe around the feel of the department, the patient experience. And then there's something called, which is broader, longer term, and harder to quantify, and certainly hard to quantify very soon after a change. But I always suggest to people, think of victim impact statements in a court case. You know, how it's affected somebody over a long period of time. You know, maybe 5-10 years later. I know as a consultant you won't be there for that, but we're looking at something that is sustainable and that people will look back and say, it had this effect on me, it changed things. Then we go on to ensuring sustainability. This can be one of the hardest things, particularly as a consultant, because you know you're not going to be around forever, and it's important that you're not around forever. So it's giving the organisation the best possible chance at that sustainable change. And that brings with it a number of things. it's really important that you leave in people there who believe in and are committed to ensuring a change is sustained. Quite often, both maybe even in your own personal style, but also with people in organisations, once they tick that particular box and it seems to have worked, they move on in their heads at least. And actually, most change needs to take time. People, old habits die hard, etc., etc. So it's really important in people and working and supporting people to make sure that those changes stay in place and that they've got the resource and the capacity and the skills to do. And it might be, and I know this sometimes happens with NHS IMAS, that you remain in almost a bit of a coaching role with a champion or whatever you want to call them, who is keeping a change on track. And that you maybe have a sort of occasional call with them, that they know they can call on you for advice or support if things get tricky. Finally, in Mick Coates' model, there's getting closure, because as a consultant, you're not going to stay forever. We all know the reputation consultants can have of diving in, quick fix, off they go, leaving sometimes a lot of debris behind them. That isn't what we aim to do in NHS, of course. But there is something in terms of getting closure about both knowing your own limits, knowing when you do need to stop and you do need to hand over, knowing how to ensure that people don't become dependent upon you for the success of a change, which can sort of creep up on you. And to be fair to our clients, it can also be something that in a consultancy role, it's actually quite hard to let go as well for some, and letting go at the right moment in the right way that actually means you're not leaving people in the lurch, neither are you creating a dependency. And I think there's to some degree some self-examination there about your personal style and how you feel about letting go of things, and how to manage that for yourself sometimes. We can just go on now to the next. I think I'm doing okay for time, aren't I? I'll whiz through this, but the challenges. Well, we all may have different views about what we find challenging, and I do think this is to some degree part of who you are, getting to know yourself and just having experiences where you discover what you find most challenging. As I've said, with organisational entry, it can quite often be that the client isn't as obvious as it looks, and you might even have people within the organisation competing over who is going to be the key client. That is often you are able to get help from IMAS in working that through, but it can sometimes be quite tricky. You could get bombarded all sorts of information early on which is contradictory. You could also find that there's a history of mistrust with consultancy. I think that can happen where you've got some long-term issues. People sort of roll their eyes and groan, here comes somebody else. And so it's actually really quite hard to work with that baggage and that history to establish your own level of independent of that baggage. I've made some notes here, some of my own experiences, and sometimes the person doing the work isn't necessarily as well got on board the people you're going to need to work with as you might assume, and that can be something you will discover quite quickly if that's the case, where they feel done to, if you like, and again you need to unravel that and try and put that right. In terms of joint diagnosis, you do often get under pressure to offer a quick fix, and you may put yourself under pressure because you may also think you've got the answer to something, and you may well have quite a lot of experience that tells you certain things are going to work here. But remember all the time that this is about a joint diagnosis. And so even if you think you know what needs to happen, your challenge then is to hold back and help other people reach their own conclusion, which might just be different to yours and need to be open to that, but may well end up in the same place as you. I had one of my clients with more than me, is that often you do get competing diagnoses. And actually, it's quite challenging to give people space to share their view of their diagnosis without nailing your colours to the mast. It's quite tricky sometimes to stay separate of exploration and challenge to take place before reaching a conclusion. Remember also that you need to not only take account of the sort of the personalities and what's being asked, but also to leave yourself scope, because the diagnosis can change. Things emerge that you maybe don't expect, you need to take account of, and you need to then sort of renegotiate that. So if we go on to building, the next slide, please, building a solution together. This can take, one of the challenges is sometimes you can get quite impatient, sometimes things don't seem to happen, or you're hanging around waiting for somebody to catch you up in the head, if you like, or whatever. You may also find that it's not easy to see the resources that you need, and there's pressure to cut corners which you instinctively know are not going to make something sustainable. They're just going to make it possible to tick a box. So you need to watch for that, and you need to sort of push back a bit about what is actually needed to keep something going over a longer period of time. And you need, in a sense, to have your challenge in your head about how you're going to do that in terms of the actual conversation you might need to have. You may find that not everyone owns the solution that seems to be emerging as the consensus, or at least a broad consensus. And you need to think about those stakeholders. How critical are they? And how do you manage that through? And of course, you may well get some sabotage. You may get all sorts of people who, for various reasons, do not want something to change or a solution to be, and you may need to deal with that or support others in dealing with that. If you go on to making change happen, I think you need to be aware of your own personal preferences. If you've ever done Myers-Briggs or anything like that, think about how your attitude change. You know, are you a real enthusiast who will jump on any change and give it a go, or are you someone who is more cautious and wants to double check it out and so on? All of those attitudes are stakeholders as well. So just take the time to think about, well, what's my approach to change, and how is that affecting the way that I am behaving here? Quite often, in my experience of looking at coursework in consultancy skills, is a lot of people attracted to consultancy, if you like, fixers. They want to go in and fix something, and that's fab. And you know that, but just remember, this is all about working together and alongside other people, and you turning up fixing something is unlikely to produce sustainable change. So you just need to maybe rein it in a bit sometimes. If, for example, you're a fixer, it can be difficult to sustain enthusiasm, especially when things get difficult or other things call on people's time. And it can be difficult to secure champions on the ground who have sufficient influence and time to be able to support the change and see it through when you're gone. I think another challenge that I've had sometimes is I've got everyone on board in, say, an A&E department, and then I've realised that the more senior people beyond the department are not really supporting of the department, and it's actually quite hard then to challenge upwards, if you're being given a particular consultancy role to sort something in a particular department, to go back and find more senior people or work alongside that department in challenging upwards, can be quite difficult. And again, we get into boundaries and where do you draw your own boundaries, and what sort of level of support you can give others if your boundaries are fairly tight. If we go on to slide, please, in terms of evidencing change. As I've said, you do need to start early. Don't leave this too late. Just keep a notebook, keep a record. I tend to use confirmatory emails as I go along with the client, which we've got to and how things have moved on, a sort of progress report. That then becomes almost a diary for me of the work that I've done and the movement that has taken place. Creatively about the types of evidence, because it can be very difficult, a bit late, and you just think, right, okay, well, I can give them these figures and I can see that X and Y. If you've established relationships where people trust you, they will talk about their experiences and how they're changed and so on. You might decide to do other more creative things in terms of little videos and so on. And then in terms of the challenges around getting closure, it can be very hard to let go. It can also, particularly those of us with tidy minds who want to pull it all together and make it look neat and tidy. And it may not be possible to do it like that because you're not in complete control, obviously, particularly as you hand things on. You're giving up any control you do have and power you do have to those in the organisation. And there is a risk if something's been really difficult. I've used the term running away, which sounds very almost cowardly. It's not intended to be that, but there is sometimes a risk that you just are so glad to see the back of a piece of work, that it's been so difficult and so challenging that you just want to go. And that's sort of entirely understandable. But of course, professionally, you've got to absolutely make sure that you don't leave others completely stranded. And for yourself, I think, that's not a good place either. So you may need to do some work for yourself, some support in getting your own club. I have actually, this is confession time, I haven't quite run away, but I think there is certainly an incident I can remember where I actually decided, this wasn't working for NHS IMAS, I should where I decided that this particular piece of work was not one that was actually had a realistic chance of success. And I go to the organisation, talk to the client and say, look, I don't think you're going to get anywhere with this, and I could spend a lot of time and you could spend a lot of money, and I think you need to press the pause. Well, we need to press the pause and look again at what you're trying to achieve and whether this bringing somebody in is the answer to this, or is there some other answer. That wasn't a particularly comfortable thing to do because there was a sense of, for me, personal failure, but I know it was the right thing to do because I did believe that the piece of work was not in fact doable. Once I'd got in and spoken to stakeholders in the particular team that was where the work was going to be done. So you can occasionally have a really challenging piece of work, but I should finish up, I think, on this. I think it's the last slide, is it? I don't know. I thought there'd be one, but it doesn't matter. Before we go on questions, what I would say is NHS IMAS, the joy, if you like, of being in the NHS IMAS pool is you are not on your own. And if you do have any concerns or you feel something is particularly tricky or difficult, you will get support from NHS IMAS, who, if you like, act as sort of provide you with either sort of mentor, senior partner, somebody who you can confidentially talk through issues. So for me, that's a fabulous resource from NHS IMAS, along with the development opportunities they give you, so that unlike, if you like, a completely independent consultant, not on their own. And I think maybe that's to leave it and take any questions if there are any. And maybe Jan, you may want to say more anyway about the development opportunities and support.
Thank you, Val, for that comprehensive overview of acting as a consultant. So if there are questions, I think we'll try and manage it with raising hands, if that's all right with everybody. We could maybe give that a go and see how it works. I'm not sure how it works when there are so many on the call, but if anyone has any immediate questions, do you want to have a go at raising your hand? Can't see any hands. So while you're thinking about questions, maybe I could just build on what Val was saying about the support that NHS IMAS offers to you whilst you're on one of our assignments. As Val mentioned, it is quite well managed in that we talk to the client, try and get a good understanding of what it is that they would like you to do whilst on the assignment, and we capture that in the form of an agreement letter, which both you and the client have sight of. So the deliverables are set out right at the beginning. So both of you are clear, but as Val says, things can change and we can accommodate that as we go along. Once you've started the assignment, we do check in with you and the client at least once a month, and in the first couple of weeks to start with, just to check that everything is on track and as you were expecting. And there is support that we can offer you as well along the way. So if, for instance, as Val said, it is particularly tricky, then we can arrange for you to have access to either a coach, if you're on a longer term assignment, and a coach might be helpful, or indeed a mentor where you can chat to somebody who can help fully maybe suggest options that you hadn't thought of. So there is no sense ever, hopefully, that you're on your own when you're on an assignment. In addition to the coaching and the mentoring, which is obviously unique to you, we do offer these webinars throughout the year. And if there are any topics that you think could be usefully covered, then drop me or the general NHS IMAS email address a suggestion, and we can try and get somebody to come and cover it for us. The other thing to mention, which might be of interest, is I'm thinking of and hopefully going to develop a collaborative workspace on the NHS Futures collaboration platform, where you can join that and come together and share experiences, maybe do a little bit of peer support, access materials and resources, that kind of thing. So if anybody is interested in working with me to get that in the format that would be most helpful to everybody, again, just drop me an email, because it's just embryonic at the moment and we can shape it in any which way would be most helpful. So that's all I've got to say on the support. But as I say, the main thing to remember is we don't just helicopter you in, and we are there to help you along the way. Thank you. Now we've got Celia with a question. You might be on mute. We may have muted you. So Celia, please ask your question and maybe unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. That's really, really interesting and helpful. I was just wondering around the sort of consultancy things that Val included in that presentation. If you are going in as an employee as opposed to somebody on a day rate, do you think that makes any difference whatsoever? Because I sort of feel that if you're an employee, you are going to get a bit more involved or embroiled in being part of an organisation, say if you're on a 6-month assignment.
Jan, shall I very quickly answer? I think IMAS NHS IMAS, you know, will have maybe have a view on this, but I do personally I do think it makes it is very tricky when you're doing that, because you are not, strictly speaking, going in as a consultant, are you? You're going in as a sort of temporary or whatever. I don't know what the word is, and I'm sure Jan will tell us how it's described. But I think it's very hard, and I think I've never done that. But what I understand from people I know who have done that, it is very hard to not become embroiled in the politics, the organisation. Personally, and I don't know what Jan's view on this is, that I think you have to work. You have to work extra hard to keep a degree of distance from from that politics, and almost try and keep in your head that you are there as an independent support, even though it's I think that's much harder, to be honest, because I think the people deserve it. But Jan, have you got a view on that?
Yes, so good question. Thanks, Celia. We would call that sort of an interim role, and it's increasingly the situation now, actually, within NHS England and NHS Improvement, certainly. So whilst it's got different challenges, I think a lot of what Val has said will still be relevant. So things like being clear about what the scope is of what you're being brought in to do. You will be working in a particular time window. So again, it will be important to be clear about what could be delivered in that time frame. And I think the point that Val was making earlier about stakeholder engagement and engaging with the right people in order to enable you to deliver those objectives is key, however long you are in there for and in what capacity. And sort of maybe Val, influencing and negotiating skills in order to quickly become accepted in inverted commas into that role, despite the fact that you will be doing it for a fixed length of time. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Val. Thanks.
Yeah, I think, yes, the big challenge, and I think it's a challenge of consultancy generally, but possibly even more so in that role, is about boundary management. And it's about being really clear about what you're there to do and what you're not there to do. And one of the things you're not there to do is get sucked into all the internecine battles around the organisation, where people, as we all know, recruit. Anyone who walks through the door, you know, there's an attempt to recruit them, you know, in those situations when there's a lot of problems. And you know, I think it's about that, being very disciplined in your own mind. I'm not here to get involved in that. I'm here with a very clear, specific role. And I think you can do that in a very supportive, friendly, kind, you know, way, but actually be really firm. You know, I'm not going down that line, because once people say that you're interested, you will have everybody competing over you're in quite an influential position. You will find that everyone's competing over you, if you like, in terms of what side are you on, or do you agree with me rather than them, and so on. And I think there is something, and I've certainly been in situations where I have felt under huge pressure to nail my colours to somebody's mast, you know, and they've been actually really quite difficult. If when I said, sorry, you know, I haven't said, but I behaved in such a way that said, I'm not actually playing that game. That's not what I'm here to do. And I think that's where you may look for support from NHS IMAS, from somebody in there to back you up, if you like, on that, if it gets difficult. But I think boundary management is always an issue. It's an issue in terms of others trying to do it. It's also an issue in you not being tempted to put yourself in or draw yourself down into a particular rabbit hole that looks fascinating or interesting or might produce, you know, you've got to be really clear about that. And I think that's as much in your head, if you like, to be very disciplined, ask yourself questions. And might be advice for most things in these situations, press, you know, if you're sensing that you're being sucked into something, just, you know, oh, you must come to this, you know, just always ask yourself, why am I going to this meeting? Is this relevant? Am I able to perform my particular role when I go to that meeting, and so on, so that you're really managing that boundary in a very conscious way.
Thank you. And do we have any more questions?
Helps, Celia.
Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Celia. Any more questions for Val of a general nature, or is any specific things anybody on assignment is dealing with or has had to deal with that they wanted to share? I know the point about mission creep happens, Val, because I've spoken to quite a few pool members when things are wandering off track, but it is good just to check in with us and find out whether it's a helpful track that you're going down or not. Definitely. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, then I will give you all 10 minutes back of your morning and finish by thanking Val very much indeed. And thank you all for bearing with us. I know the sound perhaps wasn't 100% perfect, but I'm really pleased that we managed to get through by just using Val on speaker only. So thank you very much, Val, for your time, and thanks everyone for listening. And I hope to see you at a future webinar. We do promote them, as you'll see, via an email to you. So please do watch out for the next one. And if there's anything that you think of that you'd like covering in the meantime, do please let us know. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.